Welcome to Red Ice Creations Radio. Glad to have you with us, and thank you for tuning in. If you are a regular or new listener tuning in for the first time, good to have you with us. My name is Henrik Palmgren, and we are coming to you from Sweden, Scandinavia. We are here with a new program every Thursday and Sunday. You can find us around the globe 24/7 through our website, redicecreations.com. That's REDICE creations.com. On our website you'll find radio archives, a busy news section with interesting, important, upsetting and also positive stories from around the world. I also want to mention that we have a members section containing extended interviews with many of our guests, short films, live feeds, and where you can find our entire and growing radio archive going back to over 2 years now. Today we have with us David Hatcher Childress. He is an explorer, author and publisher behind Adventures Unlimited Press. Check out his websites, adventuresunlimitedpress.com. That's for the online bookstore. And also wexclub.com. That's wexclub.com. That's the place to go to find out more information about the World Explorers Club that David is behind. David is also one of the speakers on the upcoming Beyond Knowledge conference in Liverpool, and we're going to talk more about that later in the program. We have David back with us on the show today to first discuss the Crystal Skulls. He's coming out with a new book soon, co-author with Stephen Mailer, entitled The Crystal Skulls, Astonishing Portals to Man's Past. And this is a fascinating topic that kind of gradually is becoming more hot as we move towards the release of the new Indiana Jones movie, to be out later this year. In the second segment with David, we're going to talk more about Easter Island and connect this with megalithic structures and lost cities from around the world. So much is to come. Stay tuned. Myself and our listeners, and I know because of the feedback, really enjoyed the last time you were with us, David, so it's a pleasure to welcome you back on Red Ice Creations Radio again.
Yeah, it's good to be back with you. Looking forward to our talk.
Definitely. Thank you again for taking the time in your busy schedule and spending some of it with us here today. I want to begin, I guess, to talk a little bit about the new and upcoming book here that you guys have coming out. And I personally had no idea that Stephen Mailer, who is a co-author to this book, was into these kinds of subject. I know that he has a background in Egyptology, of course, but how come you guys hooked up together for a project like this?
Well, I've known Stephen for many years, and yes, he is an Egyptologist, and he's best known for his books about Egypt, the land of Osiris, and his second book, From Light into Darkness, which is about Atenism and Akhenaten and Nefertiti and some of the early history of Egypt. But a lot of people don't know that Stephen Mailer is really also an expert on crystal skulls. He lived in the San Francisco area for many years, although he now lives in Colorado right now. But he was a good friend of Nick Nocerino. Nick has passed away now, but Nick Nocerino, who lived in San Francisco, was probably the greatest expert on crystal skulls who ever lived. He's profiled in our new book, The Crystal Skulls, and that is a book written, it's really a book in two parts. Part one is written by me, and that section is all basically the history and lore of crystals and crystal skulls, the archaeology. We talk a lot, of course, about the famous Mitchell Hedges crystal skull that was supposedly found in a lost city in Belize,
right?
Lubantun. But we're talking about a lot of different crystal skulls, the research, where these crystal skulls would come from. One of the things that's really important about these crystal skulls is even whether ancient civilizations had the technology to make these things.
Right.
And that's one of the big questions, something that we do address quite a bit in the book. His part of the book, the second part of the book, features a lot of Nick Nocerino's adventures looking for crystal skulls. Nick would actually pursue crystal skulls that he had heard about. He would literally travel all over the world, running down the owners of crystal skulls, and then he was a very sensitive psychic person. He would get some kind of a reading from crystal skulls. He was quite an expert on crystals and crystal skulls for that matter. So the second part of the book has something of a rundown of the very famous crystal skulls, such as the Max, the Texas crystal skull. There's the famous amethyst crystal skull. There are crystal skulls in some museums around the world. There's one in Paris at the Trocadero Museum now. That is supposedly an Aztec crystal skull. There's also a well-known skull in the British Museum. That skull has been off and on display. For many years it was not on display, although the postcard of that crystal skull was the best-selling postcard at the British Museum. And if you go to the gift shop there in London, I've been there many times, and they have a really nice gift shop, but they've told me that postcard is the best-selling postcard of anything in the museum. And curiously, the crystal skull itself wasn't on display.
Really?
Yet people would still buy this postcard of it.
Okay.
And I bought it myself several times.
Right. Do you know if that, because if we're thinking of the same skull here, I know that it has been on display as a fake for some time, but then it has been, removed and kind of back and forth, as you say. But, do you know if they have been able to determine, or if you guys have been able to determine if this is the real thing, so to speak?
Well, this is the big question really about many of the crystal skulls, particularly the really large, life-size crystal skulls like the one in the British Museum. They have put it back on display now because of the intense demand by the public to see these things.
Right.
Because they are remarkable. It's one of the funny things about crystal skulls is that they're absolutely real. There's just no question that these things are made of quartz crystal, which is extremely hard stone. Only diamonds and a few other jewels like that are actually harder than quartz crystal.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the big questions that the British Museum had, the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. They also had a crystal skull that was donated to them. It allegedly also came out of Mexico, and there was allegedly a collection of crystal skulls from the 1800s that was owned by the president of Mexico, Porfirio Diaz.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people aren't that aware of Mexico's rather turbulent history, particularly in the 1800s and the early part of the 1900s.
Yeah.
Where Mexico went through this number of revolutions. You have Pancho Villa and Zapata guys running around. Even the American military got involved and invaded Mexico at one point. But during those years, the late 1800s up to 1913, the president of Mexico was Porfirio Diaz, and he was part Mixtec. He was from southern Mexico, from the Oaxaca area.
Mm-hmm.
And that area is, in fact, as we talk about in our book, The Crystal Skulls, that area of southern Mexico, south of Mexico City, around Monte Alban, Mitla, the main town there is Oaxaca. That area is where the Zapotecs and the Mixtecs lived, and they were the special artisans. And even the Aztec rulers used Mixtecs and Zapotec artisans. These were the jewelers. They were the gold artisans, and they were the guys too who carved crystals and made crystal skulls.
Mm.
The big question, and this is what the British Museum was looking at, the Smithsonian, the Mitchell Hedges skull has been studied this way, is you have these really remarkable, very large crystal skulls. And if you look at the British Museum crystal skull or the Mitchell Hedges crystal skull, they are not only nearly life-size pieces of very pure, clear crystal, I mean almost perfectly translucent,
Mm-hmm.
Just to get a really large, almost perfectly clear crystal that size would be difficult, just for starters.
Right.
And then to actually carve it into, a life-size skull, I mean, this becomes really a job for someone who is incredibly skilled and would have to have special tools, including like diamond drills and diamond-tipped saws. And this is what they were looking at, the Smithsonian and the British Museum, as they started to look at some of these crystal skulls.
Mm-hmm.
The question that came to their mind was, well, if this is really an Aztec crystal skull, the Mitchell Hedges crystal skull was said to be a Mayan crystal skull.
Yeah.
And they wondered, I mean, the big thing that came up with them, which they hadn't really thought of back in, 1886, when like the London British Museum crystal skull was acquired, the Paris Museum crystal skull was acquired around that same time. They said, yeah, this is an Aztec crystal skull. This is a Mayan crystal skull. But later, as they looked into how these things could be carved, what it would take to carve them, polish them, and the question that they had was, well, did the Aztecs or the Mayans actually have the tools to make these things?
Yeah.
And they kept looking for power tool marks, things like that, something that would indicate that they had been made with crude tools or advanced tools. And what they decided in the end, that the British Museum and the Smithsonian, was that the British Museum crystal skull and the Mitchell Hedges crystal skull had been carved not with primitive tools, but with fairly modern tools. Hmm. And this, of course, raised a big red flag to them, because